The year is 2020 and the US election shaping out to be one of the most polarizing in its history, as well as the discovery of a novel coronavirus in China threatens to shake up the long-reigning liberal world order. Revisionist powers like Russia and China are prepared to assume their rightful positions in the new world order. But what if everything that could go right for Russia did? Starting out, we're introduced to the various factions within Russia, including the dominant United Russia Party, the communists in the CPRF, and the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, which is quite far from being liberal or democratic. There's also the liberal opposition led by the famously healthy and non-suicidal Navalny. Don't worry though, we'll be seeing him in another video, just not this one. That being said, I got straight to building up the economy by building infra in the most resource-rich states in hopes that we could get some civs from trade. I'm not exactly sure if this is better than just straight up building civs, so please let me know in the comments. After that, we focused on creating a sanction-proof economy, seeing as we're about to do something that will piss off much of the West in a few years. As I was building up the Russian economy, a report arrived detailing the deteriorating situation within the states. It would really be a shame if American hegemony collapsed overnight due to a civil war or something.
Where are you from? I'm from Arizona. Oh, China.
But then again, Agent Krasnov managed to achieve the same outcome in our timeline without a bloody civil war. Anyway, back in Russia, I was managing the strength of opposition parties on both the left and right wing, which were becoming increasingly popular, so much so that they might even usurp my own party. And we can't have that happen, can we? And just a few seconds later, an event popped up describing a horrific accident that resulted in the poisoning of Navalny. All I can say is, get well soon. And right after that, he wound up getting arrested. Thankfully, I'm sure the Russian prison healthcare system will take care of him. In the meantime though, the world was starting to heat up. Civil wars were erupting in Myanmar, the Congo, Saudi Arabia. Oh, and one more small country that I forgot to mention. United States of America.
Protests continue to rock cities across the United States.
Amy, good morning. In the light of day, it's almost hard to describe how much disruption there has been here.
Multiple reports that Donald Trump has briefly been taken into his underground bunker for safety.
With the effective collapse of our greatest rival, we immediately got to exploiting the situation. Patriots from Texas Oblast with warm water ports cried out for assistance from Russia. Unlike Western globalists though, we don't interfere with other countries. However, an entire armored division and 100 fighter aircraft completely unaffiliated with the Russian military volunteered of their own free will to help Texas. And who are we to stop them? Once the adventurers arrived in their T-72s and BMPs, the tide of war shifted pretty quickly. Imagine being the poor National Guard whose heaviest armament is an AR-15, having to fend off an entire armored division with air support. With the airport in Houston being secured, my fighters could conduct air support without any opposition. As I was cutting through the illegitimate Texan forces, an event popped up detailing an impossible event that the glorious masculine Putin was suffering from COVID. If anyone could beat that cold, it would definitely be, and he's dead. With Putin out of the picture, we quickly had to pick a successor. An election was held and unsurprisingly, United Russia and its candidate, Dmitry Medvedev, won. His first order of business was to nationalize the oligarch industries, and surprisingly, he decided to pursue Putinism with a human face. Truly wholesome 100. You know, I'm kinda liking this guy. I wonder what's at the bottom of the focus tree. Oh, I guess I should have seen this coming. Over in the US, things were getting bad to say the least. Anyone living in the South either had the choice of living under the Confederacy 2.0 or Atomwaffen. It wasn't all bad news though, as we welcomed the Belarusians and their delicious industry into the Russian Federation. There was little time to gloat though, as our Texan brothers were yet again under attack by communist scum, prompting us to send support. Little did I know, the aforementioned communist scum had an actual army with air support. Our performance was less than stellar as we were almost encircled. To make matters worse, Atomwaffen invaded from the east, and initially we could stop them, but soon our undersupplied units were stretched out and I was forced to recall my volunteers, even losing one division to them. I guess those silly Texans shouldn't be so dependent on foreign aid. There was little time to rest as an order for infantry equipment arrived from India. It turns out that there's yet another Indo-Pakistan war, so we sent our full support and approved the shipment along with some volunteers. As it turns out, when faced with a conventional army backed by air support and Chinese volunteers, our forces actually performed better than in America. And we managed to encircle and cut off several Pakistani divisions along with a Chinese volunteer tank division. That must have been a real awkward drive to the POW camp. Our economy grew steadily and sweeping military reforms were being conducted to wash away the ineffective Russian army of old and create an army capable of protecting the interests of the Russian Federation. Let's just put it that way. Eventually, Pakistan had to throw in the towel and our volunteers returned to the motherland with valuable military experience. Military experience which would quickly be put to good use as Medvedev declared a special military operation in Central Asia and the Caucasus, which pretty much boiled down to an ultimatum of you're either with us or against us. Only Azerbaijan refused to join, but they were made aware of the benefits of CSTO membership by force. With Central Asia and the Caucasus pacified, there was only one thing left to do. Medvedev prepared to address the nation. Our forces moved into position along the Baltics and around Ukraine. The Air Force was set up and the Navy, I kind of neglected it. Little did I know, this decision would come back to haunt me, as you will soon see. On 24 September 2026, Medvedev officially declared a special military operation in Ukraine. Even in mods, Ukraine can't get a break. The initial advance into Ukraine was successful and our armored spearheads raced to the Dnieper in order to cut off a Ukrainian retreat. Soon, we entered Kiev as other Ukrainian units were outflanked. From Crimea, we advanced into the open plains of Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblast. But things were about to go from 10 to 100. As we captured more and more of Ukraine, skirmishes erupted on our border with NATO, quickly escalating into full-blown battles. We were now past the point of no return as NATO invoked Article 5, bringing us at war with nearly the entirety of Europe. The European War had begun. With now being at war with nearly the entirety of Europe, we had to split our forces to man the entire front line. Most of our units were stationed on the Ukrainian front where they had local numerical superiority, but the lesser units stationed in the Baltics were massively outnumbered by NATO forces. Almost immediately, the garrison station in Kaliningrad came under attack from all sides, but due to our ridiculous buffs, they couldn't even push us. Even with NATO reinforcements trickling into Ukraine, we blitzed through the flat terrain of southern and central Ukraine. Meanwhile, as our Transnistrian brothers were being attacked from all sides, out of nowhere, a stray bullet hit the big-ass ammunition depot in Kobasna, causing a detonation rivaling that of a nuclear device. Which dumbass decided to build a big ammunition dump near a population center? Obviously, this is the fault of NATO globalists. Nonetheless, our mechanized units were able to link up with our divisions in the south of Ukraine, cutting off almost the entire Ukrainian army. Although we had taken most of Ukraine, the situation wasn't so good in the Baltics. NATO units exploited the gaps in my front line and took some territory, even encircling some of my divisions. A side effect of this, though, was that the NATO stacks of troops were now disorganized and had their own frontline gaps. I conducted a counterattack and pushed with limited success. Without more units, these counterattacks would mostly be fruitless. I did get a slight break though when Ukraine capitulated, sparing us the trouble of liquidating the encircled units. With the freed up divisions, I reorganized the front line into two, the Baltic front and the Balkan front. Mango! Sorry, had to do that to get your attention, and now that I have it, we were able to conduct successful counterattacks in the Baltics once our units were reorganized. I made encirclements in Estonia as well as Lithuania. I was in the middle of encircling a large NATO force in Moldova when India came asking for some jets. Can't you see I'm in the middle of something right now?
You took my only food! Now I'm gonna starve!
With such a significant portion of the NATO forces being trapped in Moldova, the advance on the Balkan front sped up considerably. But before we could fully take advantage of this, NATO troops naval invaded Odessa and Crimea. You'll come to see that this is a rather annoying, reoccurring trend. My navy had already lost some battles in the Black Sea, so there was little stopping the beehive of NATO divisions. I'll even put up a counter for every enemy naval invasion from this point forward. Regardless, we stayed on the initiative and even captured parts of Poland. NATO command seemed oblivious to this though, and instead of deploying their troops in the critical areas of Poland and Romania, they instead opted to send hundreds of thousands of men into Russia with naval invasions. The worst part? It was working. Unsurprisingly, the NATO landing force found itself overextended and destroyed piecemeal by my units. Did these massive casualties encourage the naval invasions to stop? As a matter of fact, there only came more of them. I look away for a few minutes and boom, they retook Odessa. Just a few days after we finally cleared out Estonia, the Brits showed up. Another one landed in Russia itself and even took considerable territory. Now I sound salty, and that's because I am, but it's just frustrating to see NATO sending dozens of divisions which, while annoying, end up getting destroyed by my units. They would be better put to use on the front lines in Poland or the Balkans. The French end up making another beachhead in Kherson, but this one ended up growing into most of Ukraine. The one unit I had in the area was made up of rusty T-62s dug out of storage, which had to go head to head with Leclerc tanks. I didn't know Hoi 4 had 500% boosters. Also, NATO broke through in the Arctic front, and even though it isn't a naval invasion, it's still annoying enough to be one. Right as I was mopping up the NATO units in the Caucasus, look who decided to show up in Estonia. The Italians.
When I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
By this point, I gave up on trying to stop them. NATO forces had been so depleted that I could advance into Europe faster than they could advance into Russia. The Italians even almost captured St. Petersburg had I not deployed some cannon fodder in their way. We steamrolled through Poland and took Warsaw again, as well as encircling 13 NATO divisions. Things were looking rough for NATO, and they were only gonna get rougher as we planted the Russian flag on Bucharest. The front line in Poland completely collapsed, with our units even reaching into Germany. And with the complete destruction of dozens of NATO divisions in Poland, compounded by the fall of Budapest, it was curtains for NATO. As our final reward, we got to hear one of the best super events in any Hoi 4 mod. With the war now over, the puppets, the liberated countries in the Baltics and the Balkans were now reliant on us to bankroll their war-scarred economies. Additionally, for being the victor of the First European War, Russia inflicted a debuff on itself as a gesture of goodwill. We got to work generously rebuilding devastated Eastern Europe through our focus tree. Once Medvedev's work was done, he decided to wholesomely step down and allow the democratic process to select his successor. And the winner of the election was a Vladislav Davankov of the New Russia Party, which unfortunately had the pretty boy debuff. Is there some crucial context I'm missing out on? The guy looks fine to me. Meanwhile, the nations of Western Europe, faced with utter humiliation and defeat, collapsed into themselves. France, the Iberian Peninsula, and the United Kingdom all devolved into civil war. Worst of all, the globalists in the EU decided to drop the facade of a German nation-state and federalize the EU in Germany and the lowlands. Davankov got to work on creating a new type of capitalism that suited Russia, as well as improving the democratic institutions in the country. On the contrary, the globalists in the EU went on a rampage. First, they took Italy, then Central Europe, and soon France was on its way to annexation. The EU army was already preparing to invade Iberia, and it was abundantly clear that I would be on the chopping block next. So I restarted military recruitment, but I could not hope to match the rate at which the European army grew due to our debuffs. We sent ultimatums to the few remaining undecided nations in Europe. Turkey decided to straight up go, friendship ended with NATO, now CSTO is my best friend. Wisely, the UK under Farage also applied for membership. Still, the globalists creep forward. In the focus tree, I had the choice of creating a true multipolar world or a brave Russian one. I didn't come all this way to share, so you know what I picked. Although I had been able to get Hungary and Romania into the CSTO, the imperialist ambition of the EU knew no bounds as they stormed across the Balkans, crushing our Serbian brothers. I sent equipment to the Spanish to buy time for my forces to prepare for the inevitable. And soon enough, with the capitulation of Spain, the EU set their sights on me. The Second European War had begun. With the outbreak of war, we received help from unlikely places, but we took any help that we could get. The initial EU offensive had me kinda worried until I realized we were absolutely destroying their air force. This is the power of the 3,000 black Su-57s of Medvedev. The initial EU offensive was a complete failure even with their buffs, and we counterattacked their disorganized units. On the Central European front, their cohesion deteriorated, but the Balkan front remained steady. Having achieved near total air dominance, the EU's divisions couldn't hold us. I noticed a pattern that whenever we moved the front line into another air zone, our advance immediately bogged down until I sent the air force into the new air zone. For the second time in 100 years, Russian tanks entered Berlin once again. With the capitulation of one of the EU puppets, we could drive straight through southern Germany and reach the Swiss border, effectively cutting the front line in half. Our tanks hit the Alps like a brick wall, and our advance stopped as tanks and IFVs don't tend to do well in snowy mountain terrain. Except for this one, of course. But in the skies over eastern Germany, our CAS was putting in work, dealing a whopping 86% damage to ground units. At this point, the EU army had it worse than the Iraqis during Desert Storm. It was even worse in the Balkans as we dealt well over 114% damage, literally destroying EU equipment before it could be manufactured. Near Berlin, I closed the pincer around dozens of EU divisions, trapping them in the city. Once the pocket had been liquidated, frontline in Germany was so battered that I was able to make several more huge encirclements. Our tanks raced to the sea and sealed the fate of hundreds of thousands of EU troops trapped in Hamburg and Denmark. Unfortunately, while I wasn't paying attention, the EU invaded and capitulated the UK. But that's probably part of Nigel's grand plan, as he said, "Up the raw." The EU attempted a counterattack which ended up in disaster as I gobbled up yet another 8 tank divisions. Once we had reached the sea, the EU had their own version of Dunkirk with over 40 divisions trapped in the Netherlands. After so many devastating and crippling encirclements, we had broken the back of the EU army and they were completely routed throughout France. Before long, Paris was encircled and we rolled over the plains of France all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, effectively splitting what remained of the European Union into Iberia and Italy. Due to the Alps, Italy was something of an impenetrable fortress. The same could not be said for Iberia, which was quickly overrun. Having lost so many victory points and millions of men, the EU finally capitulated. All that was left to do was to mop up their puppet states in Scandinavia and the UK. Soon enough, the EU puppet in the UK capitulated, followed by the one in Scandinavia. With millions of dead on both sides and the entire European continent reduced to rubble, the war had ended. We had vanquished the globalist menace for good. If you've made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. I know some parts seem pretty rough, but this is my first serious try at making a YouTube video. If you have any suggestions on how to improve, please comment them below. Signing off.